You wake up face down in something that smells like wet goat and crushed dreams. Your back aches like it just got into a drunken fistfight with a cartwheel, and your ankles are wrapped in itchy linen that feels like it was personally designed by someone who hates comfort. Congratulations. It's the 12th century. You're a bridge builder now. Not by choice, of course. Nobody chooses this. It's not a lifestyle. It's a sentence. You squint toward the rising sun, which is aggressively bright and doing absolutely nothing to warm you. The air is damp. The fog smells faintly of manure, and your job today, as it has been for the past 7 months, is to haul giant rocks into a freezing river using ropes that wouldn't pass a modern safety inspection for a swing set. And if you're wondering where your coffee is, it's non-existent. No coffee. No caffeine. Just cold gruel and passive-aggressive stares from a foreman who's been yelling since dawn and will almost certainly die from tetanus by next winter. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always oddly satisfying to imagine someone listening to medieval bridge building misery while lying in bed in, say, suburban Tokyo at 2 a.m. Now, let's talk about what you're really here for. How the actual hell did medieval people build bridges without cement? Because yes, that's real. These people built massive, stone-munching, river-straddling beasts of architecture, without cement, without modern machinery, and usually without knowing whether they'd collapse the second someone dared to walk across them. And somehow, they didn't just survive. Some of these things are still standing today. Meanwhile, your IKEA nightstand can't handle being wiped with a wet cloth. Let's set the scene. You're in a sleepy riverside hamlet, or, in this case, a muddy hellhole that calls itself a village. There's no infrastructure here. Just a collection of huts, a handful of semi-domesticated animals that may or may not be edible, and a river that divides your sorry patch of land from someone else's sorry patch of land. This river is your enemy now. It's cold, unpredictable, and has already claimed at least 3 oxen, a dozen barrels of ale, and one very drunk local who swore he could swim like a duck. Spoiler, he could not. But you need to get across. Because trade exists. Even in this underdeveloped economy of turnips, pewter spoons, and bad poetry, someone needs to cross the river to sell their moldy cheese or marry a cousin in another village. And for that, you need a bridge. Not a cute wooden footbridge with railings and fairy lights. We're talking serious, stone-anchored, maybe it won't collapse kind of bridge. But ow. No cement. No cranes. No calculators. Just brain power, back pain, and the stubborn optimism of people who have nothing to lose except maybe their left hand in a rope pulley accident. Here's the dirty little secret of medieval bridge building. It was less about engineering and more about brute force, blind trust, and very creative use of gravity. These people had to use what they had, mostly local stone, lots of timber, and a surprising number of monks who, for some reason, were really into architecture. You shuffle to the riverbank where your co-workers, fellow peasants and half-trained masons, are busy stacking massive chunks of rock like they're playing the world's most dangerous game of Jenga. You watch one of them, a man named Hugo who smells like fish and despair, hoist a slab of limestone using a medieval crane that looks like it was designed by someone high on barley wine. It creaks ominously, and everyone holds their breath. The slab lands with a thud, narrowly missing a foot. Cheers erupt. No one died. Yet. Let's pause and appreciate the genius of the medieval crane. These contraptions, often powered by humans walking in giant hamster wheels, were a staple of construction from the Roman Empire all the way to the Renaissance. Picture this, a giant vertical wheel, like a Ferris wheel, except it's got a man inside it walking in circles, so the crane arm can slowly lift a rock. That man is probably underpaid, overworked, and slightly dizzy. That man is you. But lifting the stone is only step one. Next, you need to figure out where to put it. In modern times, we use laser levels and GPS. In medieval times, you had a guy with a stick. Maybe 2 guys if it was a cathedral job. They'd use simple tools, measuring ropes, weighted plumb lines, and wooden templates, to make sure everything was lined up. Was it accurate? Occasionally. Was it good enough? Hopefully. But even with precise measurements, how do you make stone stay in place without cement? Here's the trick. They use something called dry stone construction. It's exactly what it sounds like, stacking stones without any mortar. You rely entirely on gravity, weight, and careful shaping. Each stone is cut to fit as tightly as possible with its neighbors. It's like a puzzle, except every piece weighs 200 pounds and failure equals drowning. To make this work, they'd card the stones so that their weight pressed inward toward the center of the bridge. The more pressure on the keystone, that top central piece in an arch, the stronger it becomes. It's counterintuitive, like most things in medieval life. The more you press on it, the less likely it is to fall apart. Kind of like medieval marriages. Now, this whole setup required arches. Lots and lots of arches. You're not building a flat platform over a river. You're building multiple curved structures that can support immense loads without snapping in half like your will to live after 6 months of bridge duty. Each arch started with something called centering. No, not mindfulness. Not yoga. Wooden centering was the temporary support frame that held the arch stones in place until the keystone was inserted. Once the keystone was in, the arch could hold itself and the wooden frame could be removed, unless it got stuck, in which case congratulations, your bridge has a crunchy wooden core now. And here's the best part, none of this was fast. A single medieval bridge could take years, even decades, to finish. While you're hauling stones and avoiding death by timber, your children are probably learning the same job. Your grandkids might be the ones to actually use the bridge. You'll be lucky to see it halfway done before something kills you. Bridge building, the family tradition that builds character, calluses, and occasionally coffins. Sometimes they even had to divert rivers just to build the foundations. Imagine that. No pumps. No machinery. Just shovels, sweat, and enough timber to build temporary channels, dams, and causeways. You might spend an entire summer ankle-deep in muck, digging a trench so the water goes slightly left for a few weeks while the foundation stones are gently lowered into place like cursed Lego bricks. You take a break. Your hands are blistered, your knees are muddy, and your snack is a chunk of rye bread with a texture somewhere between driftwood and old sponge. You eat it anyway, because lunch is not negotiable when you burn 3,000 calories a day manually moving rocks. You glance across the river, imagining what life will be like when the bridge is done. Faster trade. More visitors. Maybe a traveling juggler or a troupe of musicians with 3 working teeth between them. But that dream feels distant. Like 2 floods and a famine from now distant. Let's not forget the religious aspect. Many medieval bridges were sponsored or built by monks, monasteries, or the church itself. Not out of the kindness of their hearts, though they'd say it was for charity, but because bridges were seen as acts of piety. Like, hey, God, I build a bridge over the Devil's River. Please ignore the whole usury thing. Sometimes the bridge even had a chapel built into it. Not for aesthetics. That was a toll booth in disguise. Because yes, tolls. Once the bridge was built, you better believe someone was collecting coins every time a cart passed. Maybe a knight. Maybe a corrupt abbot. Maybe your Uncle Jeff the turnip dealer. Medieval infrastructure was a business, not a public service. And if you couldn't pay? Well, enjoy the old route, fording the river with your pants off, praying to St. Anthony that you don't get swept downstream with the next goat. You wrap up your shift as the sun dips below the horizon. Your limbs feel like boiled leather. Your skin is scraped, your nose is sunburned, and the rope burns on your palms now form a topographic map of regret. You trudge back to your hovel. No hot shower. No workers' compensation. Just a straw mattress and the faint hope that tomorrow's weather won't involve sleet. You fall asleep to the sound of hammering, rhythmic, eternal, slightly offbeat like a bard with poor timing. The bridge is not yet done. But stone by stone, it grows. Held together not by cement, but by precision, weight, friction, and your suffering. And if that doesn't help you drift off, don't worry. We've got at least 9 more chapters of stone dragging, water diverting, plague avoiding, architecture defying bridge drama to go. Sleep well, your shift starts again at dawn. You wake up coughing. Again. Because your mattress, if you can call a moldy sack of straw and rodent drama a mattress, is damp, lumpy, and positioned exactly 3 inches from a wall that weeps moisture like it's emotionally unstable. The fire went out hours ago, which means your breath is now visible in the air. You pull the blanket closer, which does precisely nothing. Welcome back to the 12th century, where every morning starts with the question, is that smell me or mildew? You stretch. Bad idea. Your back responds by screaming in Latin, Your knees crunch like gravel in a bread roll, and your elbows are radiating the kind of pain usually reserved for cursed marionettes. You sigh deeply, because you know what today is. It's Bridge Day. Again. Not that you ever get a day that isn't Bridge Day. Medieval work-life balance is mostly just work and then you die. You trudge out of a cottage, boots squelching through a puddle of what you hope is mud, and shuffle toward the riverside construction site. It's still foggy, the kind that hangs in the air like someone's burnt soup. Across the river, you see the beginnings of the bridge's first arch. It's kind of beautiful. You hate that. You wish you didn't find it impressive. But the symmetry, the stonework, the fact that you've watched this pile of misery slowly morph into a structure with actual form, it's weirdly satisfying. Like watching someone build a cathedral out of trauma. One of the apprentices greets you. His name is Ewan. He's 15 and already has the dead eyes of a man who's seen too many things fall into a river. The oxen broke the pulley again, he mumbles. Also, the water wheel snapped and took out a guy's lunch. You nod solemnly. Not because you care. You didn't even like the guy's lunch. But because this is standard procedure in the world of bridge building. If it's not the pulleys, it's the scaffolding. If it's not the scaffolding, it's the river. And if it's not the river, it's your own immune system turning on you because someone sneezed on the barley. Before we dig any deeper into today's episode of Stonehenge But Said, let's talk about the team. Because building a bridge in medieval Europe was never a one-man job. Unless that man was a delusional baron with a god complex and a pet peacock. In reality, bridge construction was handled by a chaotic ensemble of peasants, masons, carpenters, engineers, if you can call them that, rope makers, stone cutters, errand boys, monks with overly ambitious blueprints, and, occasionally, a nobleman pretending to help but mostly just shouting. And this team? Oh, it's dysfunctional. Every day feels like team building in the seventh circle of hell. The lead mason, Master Willem, communicates only through grunts and wildly gesturing with a hammer. His apprentice, a guy named Torben who smells like overcooked cabbage, interprets those grunts into instructions for the rest of you. Are they correct? Unclear. But if something falls and breaks, everyone blames the river. Stone cutters are their own breed. These are the people who take raw, uncooperative rocks and shape them into the exact dimensions needed to support the impossible dream of not dying horribly. They work in pairs, using chisels, mallets, and language that would make a sailor blush. One guy named Bernard claims he can tell the age of a stone just by licking it. He's probably lying. But he's also missing 2 fingers, so no one questions him. Then you've got the carpenters, the real MVPs of temporary architecture. These poor souls build the scaffolding, walkways, cranes, and that lovely wooden centering that holds the arches in place until gravity takes over. Everything they build is meant to be temporary. Which is funny, because half the time it lasts longer than the stonework. And let's not forget the engineer. He's called Brother Giaffro, and he's technically a monk, but you've seen him drink wine like it's water and argue with geese. He carries a rolled-up parchment everywhere, allegedly the bridge plans, and mutters to himself in Latin while drawing spirals in the dirt. You're not sure he knows what he's doing, but he looks confident. And that's all that matters in medieval engineering: robes, confidence, and not falling off the scaffolding. Speaking of which, today's task is scaffolding repair. Because someone, not naming names, but it rhymes with Sluin, overloaded the upper walkway with stones. It collapsed in the night, waking up the sheep, the baker's dog, and everyone within a 1-mile radius. The only thing holding the arch now is sheer luck and 2 beams that creak louder than a dying troubadour. So, you and 4 others, one of whom has a limp and one of whom is 70% drunk, set about hauling new timber into position. This involves ropes, swearing, and a level of balance normally reserved for tightrope walkers and egomaniacs. You carefully lift a new beam into place, praying to every saint whose name you can remember, Saint Barbara, Saint Leonard, and possibly Saint Steve, and secure it with iron pins heated over a nearby fire. The fire, by the way, is fueled by charcoal made from local wood. It burns hot and leaves your skin dry and your eyes watering. You try not to breathe it in, but the wind laughs in your face and redirects the smoke directly into your soul. Lunch comes around. You sit on a pile of cold stones, chewing stale cheese and something that was once bread but has now evolved into a medieval form of styrofoam. Across from you, someone's eating boiled turnips. No salt. No butter. Just sadness. You all eat in silence, broken only by the distant clang of a drop hammer and the occasional ow from someone whose lunch has a nail in it. In moments like this, you might wonder, why not just use cement? The answer is delightfully grim. Cement, or more accurately, Roman concrete, was a lost art in much of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. The knowledge of making durable, water-resistant concrete vanished along with aqueducts, centralized heating, and the joy of bathing. Sure, some pockets of civilization retained hints of the technique, but for the average 12th century mason, cement was a myth, like unicorns, or personal hygiene. So instead, you rely on friction, compression, clever geometry. You build arches because they spread the weight into the ground. You stack stones with such precision that they hold under their own mass. You use lime mortar sparingly, a paste made from burned limestone, sand, and water, mostly as a lubricant to help the stones settle into place. It's not cement in the modern sense. It's more like thick regret. Afternoon arrives. You help guide a new keystone into position. It's a tense moment. The centering creaks. Everyone holds their breath. You whisper a prayer. The stone drops into place. Silence. Then a small, steady rumble as the weight distributes. The arch holds. You exhale. The structure sighs. No one died. That's a win. By sunset, you've managed to reinforce the walkway, complete the third arch, and reattach the pulley system with a replacement rope made from twisted hemp and silent desperation. Your hands look like they belong to a tree. Your clothes are soaked with sweat, river spray, and the blood of 1,000 tiny splinters. You're too tired to complain. Which is good, because complaining earns you a fresh bucket of latrine duty. You shuffle home in the twilight, bones groaning, head pounding, stomach growling. Dinner is onion stew, which is mostly water with hints of onion. Maybe. Or maybe it's just warm disappointment. You eat it anyway. Because tomorrow, you're lifting another 30 stones and hauling a dozen beams across a river that resents your existence. As you curl up on your sad, sagging mattress and listen to the sound of mice arguing in the corner, you think about the bridge. About the fact that this muddy, miserable structure might outlive you by centuries. That people you'll never meet might one day walk across it, unaware of your callous hands and the effort it took not to throw yourself into the river. But for now, you sleep. Exhausted, soot-streaked, and one day closer to completion. And if you've drifted off halfway through this, don't worry. The scaffolding will still be here when you wake up. You wake up drenched. Not in sweat this time, though, let's be honest, that's always part of the morning package. No, this is river water. Cold, mean-spirited, I don't care about your dreams river water. Because last night, the rain decided to wage full-scale hydrological warfare on your half-built bridge, and now your morning begins ankle-deep in brown, rushing spite. The river has risen at least 2 feet. The muddy path you walked yesterday is gone, swallowed by churning sludge and God's indifference. The scaffolding, tilting like it's been drinking all night. The centering frames, those beautifully crafted temporary wooden arches that supported the actual archstones, are now bobbing slightly in the current like forgotten regrets. Someone shouts. You look over and see Brother Giaffro flailing his arms in a way that's half panic, half interpretive dance. His precious plans are soaked. The inks run, the geometries dissolved into abstract chaos, and the only thing left readable is a faint drawing of a fish in the margins, which might have been there from the beginning. Giaffro is either crying or conducting the water spirits with his sleeves. Welcome to bridge building during the rainy season. So before you decide to lie face first in a puddle and let nature have you, let's do the usual routine. Take a second to stretch. Yes, it hurts. That's normal. And while we're here, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this journey into wet, historical despair. And hey, leave a comment letting me know where in the world you're watching this from. What time is it for you? 3 a.m.? 2 p.m.? Are you already asleep? Excellent. That means the medieval bridge gods are pleased. Right. Back to the cold. See, the biggest enemy of medieval bridge construction isn't poor tools or inaccurate measurements, or even the guy who thought that eyeballing the angle was a reliable method of physics. No, it's the river itself. Rivers, especially the angry, wild ones that people insisted on building across in medieval Europe, don't like being interrupted. They're fast, They flood, they shift course without warning, and they contain exactly zero sympathy for human ambition. And in the days before damming, dredging, or, science, rivers were kind of like angry toddlers, unpredictable, prone to tantrums, and very good at destroying things you care about. So today, the job is salvage. You and about 10 other half-awake builders are tasked with wading knee-deep into river slime to retrieve one of the centering arches that has partially collapsed. It's made of massive timber beams, held together with wooden pegs, rope, and a prayer. You attempt to lift it. It groans. The rope snaps. A beam clocks you in the shin. Pain radiates upward. You say something that probably offends at least 3 saints. But you don't stop, because the alternative is letting the whole arch drift downstream into some farmer's sheep pasture. Again, let's take a moment here to talk about foundations. Because in bridge building, it's all about what lies underneath. Like that time you tried to fix your problems by buying a new cloak instead of dealing with your emotional decay. It's not about the surface, it's what's holding it up. In dry terrain, foundation digging is already brutal. You dig pits, remove rocks, smash roots, and hope the ground isn't secretly a bog. But in a river, in a flowing river, you're fighting physics. You're trying to build underwater with 12th century tools and 2% understanding of hydraulics. So how do you do it? Well, you build a thing called a cofferdam. It sounds fancy. It isn't. It's basically 2 rings of sharpened timber posts hammered deep into the riverbed, filled with clay and stones to block the water. Then, you manually scoop the water out with buckets until the inside is dryish. Now you've got a little dry pit inside the river where you can build your piers, the thick stone pillars that hold up the arches. This, of course, takes weeks. The water always tries to seep back in. Sometimes it wins. You bail it out again. Occasionally, the whole dam collapses in the middle of the night and floods everything. That's when you scream into the void and start over. Right now, the cofferdam on the west side is holding. Barely. You can see water bubbling up between the stones like it's making fun of your optimism. Inside the dam, the masons are setting huge squared stones into place. These are ashlars, quarried and shaped with an almost obsessive level of precision. They're laid dry, without mortar, relying on friction and tight joints to stay in place. Sometimes, iron clamps or lead dowels are used to keep them from shifting. Sometimes, you just hope. The goal is to make a pier so solid that even when the river throws its worst tantrum, the bridge shrugs and says, "Is that all you've got?" It never says that, but the fantasy helps. Meanwhile, above ground, the carpenters are rebuilding the centering. This involves dragging long oak beams, so heavy they require 6 people or 2 oxen to move, across makeshift gangways and then tying them together with fiber rope made for hemp. There are no nails. You don't trust nails. You trust friction, leverage, and yelling. And here's where it gets fascinating. The centering must be perfectly shaped to match the final arch. Because when the keystone is dropped in and the wooden supports are removed, the stones should lock into place and stay there forever. No mortar. No glue. Just gravity. It's like playing Jenga with your life on the line. So you spend the afternoon shaving wood, adjusting angles, and standing waist-deep in water while Brother Geoffrey tries to redraw the plans from memory. You're not convinced he had plans to begin with. He just keeps muttering about load-bearing virtue and drawing concentric circles. Lunch? That's cute. You eat it standing up. It's once again turnip-based. And somehow even wetter than yesterday. You fish a splinter out of your stew and pretend it's a crouton. But even in all this cold, damp chaos, there's something beautiful happening. The arch begins to take shape again. You lift stone after stone, carefully shaped, each unique, but made to fit a very specific spot in the curve. They're wedge-shaped. That's key. Each one is wider at the top than the bottom. This allows them to press against each other when the keystone is inserted, locking the whole thing in place. It's geometry. It's pressure. It's pain. But it works. By sunset, the new arch is ready for its keystone. This is the final piece. The one stone that transforms a pile of carefully stacked gravity nightmares into an actual, self-supporting bridge. You watch as it's lowered slowly, inch by inch, into the gap. The sun breaks through the clouds for exactly 3 seconds. The birds pause. Brother Geoffrey holds his breath. Thunk. The keystone slides into place. The centering groans. A silence. Then, nothing. No collapse. No screaming. Just a sudden, eerie calm. The bridge held. You collapse onto a rock. Wet. Cold. Aching. But alive. And vaguely impressed. You've done it again. Defied the river. Built something that, for now, stands tall and proud against water, weather, and common sense. As you limp home in the dusk, you think about what you're really building. Not just a way across the river, but a legacy. Something that might still exist when you're long gone, when the river's changed its course, and Brother Giaffra spirals are just weird graffiti. But for now, you eat stew. You nurse your bruises. You wonder how you still smell like fish. And maybe, just maybe, you sleep a little easier tonight, knowing that tomorrow, at least one arch will still be standing. Or not. Rivers are petty like that. You wake up to the sound of someone arguing with a donkey. It's not just any argument. It's philosophical. One man, possibly a mason, possibly hallucinating from barley fatigue, is trying to explain to the donkey why it must move forward, not backward. The donkey, naturally, disagrees. The sun isn't even fully up yet, and already this bridge site is a symphony of groans, creaks, and beasts of burden who truly don't care about the miracle of medieval engineering. You roll off your straw mat, which smells faintly of mildew and betrayal, and stumble into your boots. One has a hole. The other might have a frog in it. It's too early to care. The day's challenge, transporting stone. Heavy stone. Large stone. Soul-crushing, joint-destroying blocks of sediment that some architect, probably drunk on fermented fig wine, decided would be essential for the next pier foundation. These stones do not move themselves. They are, unfortunately, about 5 miles away. So, we need to talk about medieval logistics, also known as how to get 8 tons of rock from point A to point B using a combination of bad roads, screaming men, and emotionally detached donkeys. But before we haul a single stone, please take a second to subscribe to the channel if you're enjoying this calming descent into logistical despair. And comment below, where are you watching from, and how late is it right now? 4:02 a.m.? Respect. You're more dedicated than this donkey. Back to the problem. In the modern world, you would solve this issue with a flatbed truck, GPS routing, and maybe a disgruntled delivery driver named Carl. But here in the 12th century, you have exactly 3 options. Donkeys. Stubborn. Oxen. Slow. Your own back. Short-lived. Stone, especially cut ashlar, isn't found lying around. It comes from quarries, often miles away, up hills, across valleys, and occasionally in places that are spiritually cursed or just extremely inconvenient. And since someone in your town decided to build this bridge without consulting the laws of terrain, you get to spend your morning watching 3 carts and 6 animals try to navigate a muddy trail so rutted it technically qualifies as an archaeological site. The carts are marvels of basic engineering. They are wooden, wheeled, and that's it. They creak like elderly knees and are held together with pegs, iron bands, and hope. There are no shock absorbers, no suspension, no brakes that don't involve yelling. Each cart can carry maybe 2 or 3 blocks of stone before the axles begin threatening legal action. The wheels are solid wood, with an iron band for strength, and they dig into every pothole like they're searching for buried treasure. Every 20 feet, someone has to stop and realign the load with a crowbar. You are one of those someones. The quarry stones are loaded using ramps, levers, and teamwork, which in this case means 6 people grunting while a 7 screams about angles. The stones themselves are chalky, roughly dressed, and suspiciously warm, as if absorbing the collective hatred of everyone involved. The carts begin their slow journey. The donkeys, bless their passive-aggressive little hooves, proceed to stop every 50 paces to contemplate existence. They chew grass. They stare at trees. They flatly refuse to move if there's a puddle deeper than an inch. One of them just sits down and hums softly into the void. You push. You pull. You beg. You quote psalms. Nothing. Eventually, the donkey moves. Not because of you, probably just because it remembered something important about a bush up ahead. Regardless, the cart lurches forward, and the stone shifts slightly, threatening to crush someone's foot. You jump out of the way. The man next to you is not so lucky. He curses in Latin. This entire journey takes the better part of the day. A 5-mile trip might as well be an expedition to the Holy Land. You pass through muddy woods, uneven hills, and a village where someone offers you fermented goat's milk, which you absolutely should not drink. You do anyway. You regret it within an hour. By late afternoon, the first stones reach the worksite. There's no applause. No parade. Just a quiet finally muttered under someone's breath, followed by the sharp crack of someone dropping a stone chisel in frustration. You now begin unloading, a process that involves ramps, ropes, more levers, and the sheer willpower of everyone not already halfway into quitting. But logistics aren't just about moving things, they're about timing. You need lime for mortar for some parts of the bridge, timber for scaffolding, iron for clamps, food for the workers, and booze for morale. Everything has to arrive more or less when needed. There are no storage warehouses. No supply chain managers. Just a monk with a tally stick and a memory like wet parchment. Let's talk about lime. To make lime, you need limestone, which is heated in a kiln until it becomes quicklime, a substance so caustic it could give you chemical burns if you sneeze on it wrong. Then it's slaked with water to make lime putty, or lime mortar. This is used in areas of the bridge that do use binding, particularly above water level or in the facing stones. The kilns, of course, are a few miles away. And guess what? Lime doesn't like being moved. It's heavy. It's unpredictable. And if it gets wet during transport? Congratulations, you've just created an exothermic reaction in your cart. Surprise fire. So naturally, you assign two poor souls to haul sacks of lime uphill using sledges. They're white from dust by the end of the day. Their eyes twitch slightly. You pretend not to notice. Timber, too, has to be hauled from forests and then shaped, hewn, planed, and arranged into beams. These are used for scaffolding, ramps, the centering arches, and various platforms. And because each beam is the size of a baby whale and only slightly less slippery, moving them involves rolling logs, horses, and occasional injuries. By sunset, your worksite is a chaotic ballet of unloading. The masons argue over which stones are arch-worthy. The carpenters are trying to stabilize a scaffold that leans like a politician in a tavern. Someone dropped a lunch sack into the river and is now fishing for it with a spear. The donkey has finally reached enlightenment and refuses all worldly tasks. And through it all, you begin to realize something strange. Despite the back-breaking, mind-numbing, soul-scraping work, the bridge is growing. Slowly. Stone by stone. Timber by timber. The arch that yesterday looked like wishful thinking now looks possible. The piers are rising, their surfaces chiseled smooth, their joints tight enough to deny even the river's sneakier ambitions. You eat your barley stew sitting on a pile of timber. The sky is turning pink, and your hands are blistered. Your clothes are streaked with lime dust, and you're pretty sure you're developing a permanent stoop. But the bridge is coming together. This is the miracle of medieval logistics. No blueprints. No forklifts. No rail systems. Just people, animals, and the grim determination that this crossing will exist if it kills everyone involved. And it often does. But not today. Today, you move the stone. And tomorrow, you shape it into history. You wake up coughing. Not politely. Not the kind of cough that says, "Oh, there's a bit of dust in the air." No. This is a chest-rattling, lung-vibrating explosion of phlegm, followed by a hacking wheeze that sounds suspiciously like a dying bellows. Congratulations. You have what medieval folks charmingly call catarrh. In modern terms, you're sick. Again. Possibly from that river water you accidentally drank yesterday. Possibly from inhaling lime dust. Or maybe it was the goat milk. We told you not to drink the goat milk. But none of that matters. Because you're alive, and there's a bridge to build. Sore throat or not, the work doesn't stop. And no, there's no sick leave. No medieval HR department to file a grievance with. Your health insurance consists of herbal tea and not dying. You stand up, slowly. Your joints crack like overbaked bread. Your muscles ache. Your fingers are stained white from lime and cracked like poorly maintained pottery. Outside, it's raining. Because of course it is. The sight is mud. Endless, inescapable, shoe-swallowing mud. There is northwest dry place. The air smells like wet timber, horse manure, and resignation. You squelch toward the worksite, every step a test of balance, and whether your shoes are really as attached as you thought. Let's talk about the daily grind, not the romanticized version of bridge building, but the actual day-to-day. The part where your back seizes up from hauling stones, your hands go numb from the chisel, and your coworker has had the same boil on his neck for 6 months. But before we get too deep into this swamp of damp despair, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you're finding comfort in this absurdly honest walk through human suffering. Drop a comment too. Where are you listening from, and are you still awake? If so, you're doing better than Giaffro, who just walked into a wall. Back to the misery. Your job today? Mortar mixing. If hell had a side hustle, this would be it. You start with slake lime, already a problem, because if it wasn't slaked just right, it'll hiss and bubble when you add water. One poor guy learned that the hard way last week when the lime ate through his boots. And his dignity. Then there's the sand. It's coarse. It's damp. And you have to sift it to remove twigs, rocks, and the occasional angry beetle. All of this is dumped into a pit and mixed, by foot, until it reaches the consistency of sadness. You stomp it in circles, sweat dripping into the mix, your toes raw and freezing. The pit smells like wet ash and failure. Once it's ready, the mortar is scooped into wooden buckets and passed hand-to-hand up crude scaffolding. There's no pulley system, just a human chain of grumbling builders trying not to drop anything on each other's heads. Spoiler, they drop things. Over on the Western Pier, the masons are hard at work setting the next course of stones. It's a delicate dance. Apply mortar, set stone, level it, tap it with a mallet, adjust again. Too much mortar and it'll squeeze out and ruin the joint. Too little and the stone might shift. The whole process depends on precision and a complete disregard for your personal comfort. Then there's the scaffolding. Oh, the scaffolding. It's a death trap of planks and ropes, swaying with every gust of wind, soaked through from last night's storm. You climb it anyway. Because you have to. Because someone up there dropped a trowel into the river and needs a new one. The wood creaks beneath you. The boards bend ominously. One is split. You step over it and keep going. At the top, you deliver the trowel. The mason thanks you with a grunt, then immediately drops it again. You consider pushing him off the side. You don't. Yet. Let's pause for a moment to appreciate what medieval health and safety look like. It didn't. There were no hard hats. No OSHA. If a rock fell on your head, you either died or became a local legend for surviving. If you broke a leg, you got a splint and a prayer. Infection? Good luck. Your options were honey, herbs, or amputation. That's it. And yet somehow, these people kept building. Despite the injuries. Despite the weather. Despite the boils, bruises, blisters, and chronic back pain that started at age 15 and never left. They kept building. Because there was status in it. Purpose. You weren't just laying stones. You were creating something that might outlast the village, the Lord, the plague. You. A bridge was a legacy. A way to be remembered, or at least cursed less than the guy who designed the town's public latrines. Lunchtime arrives. Today's menu, barley bread, stale, salted fish, too salted, and turnip mash. Why always turnips? You eat in silence, staring at the stones. Your hands are trembling slightly. Whether from fatigue or fever, you're not sure. You chew anyway. Next to you, one of the older builders, Arnulf, is wrapping his leg in linen. He slipped earlier. The gash is deep. He says he's fine. You can see the bone. He still goes back to work. Why? Because if he doesn't, someone else has to do twice the lifting. And no one wants that. So you keep going. The afternoon brings another task, carving stone. This is where the true artistry of medieval bridge building shows itself. Each stone, especially in the arches, must be perfectly cut. Not by machine. Not by laser. By hand. With hammer and chisel. The noise is deafening. The rhythm hypnotic. Chink chink. Chink chink. A beat that never stops. The air fills with dust. It clings to your face, your clothes, your soul. You blink and feel grit between your eyelids. You measure angles with wooden templates. You check the curve of each wedge-shaped block. You try not to think about how one tiny miscalculation could mean the whole arch collapses during installation. Or worse, 10 years later when someone's carting wine across it. By sunset, your fingers are bleeding. Your back is wrecked. You've grown suspicious of the smell coming from your boots. But the day stones are done. Ready. Lined up like puzzle pieces, waiting for their moment. You look at them and feel something you haven't felt all day. Pride. Not joy. That's a luxury. Not happiness, you forgot what that feels like. But pride. Quiet, bone-deep pride that you made something today. Something solid. Something that will hold weight long after your body stops doing the same. You walk home in the dark, coughing still. The stars are out. The donkey's asleep, mid-chew. Giaffro is humming to himself and scribbling circles in the dirt. And you? You collapse into your damp mattress, curl around your sore ribs, and wonder what tomorrow's pain will be. But deep down, you know this, you'll be back. Because the bridge isn't done. And neither are you. Not yet. You wake up with a nosebleed. Again. Not because someone hit you, although that very nearly happened yesterday when you dropped a chisel off the scaffolding and almost sent Giaffro to meet the saints, but simply because your sleeping area is full of lime dust, mold spores, and despair. Also, you've been breathing in stone powder for 2 months. At this point, your lungs are about 30% granite. You wipe your nose on your sleeve. There is no tissue paper. Only scratchy wool, shared linens, and the constant knowledge that your shirt is probably doubling as someone else's towel. Possibly the donkey's. Anyway, you've got bigger problems this morning. The arch construction starts today. Which means you're now going to learn the single most absurdly magical concept in all of medieval engineering. How to build a curve using a bunch of straight rocks and raw panic. Let's begin with a fun fact. Did you know that arches don't want to exist? That's right. Every stone in an arch is trying, very politely, to fall down. What keeps them up isn't glue, or mortar, or some ancient wizard. It's physics, gravity, compression, and geometry, which, in medieval terms, means we figured it out by trial, error, and occasional fatal collapse. Before we dive into the miracle of keystones and centering, go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you're still awake and still weirdly invested in this story of stone-based suffering. And please let me know in the comments what time it is where you are. If you're in bed at 3:11 a.m. right now, you're officially more stable than the arch we're building. So, what's the first step to building an arch? You don't start with the arch. You start with nothing. More specifically, air. Empty space between two piers. That space will one day become a graceful, curved passageway over the river. But right now, it's just a yawning gap and a reminder of how far you could fall if you mess up. This is where centering comes in. No, not meditation. Though you'll wish you had that too. We're talking about a temporary wooden framework, essentially a ribbed skeleton shaped like the underside of the arch, that holds each stone in place until the final piece is inserted. Think of it like a very heavy, very medieval IKEA bed frame. It has to be exact. It has to be stable. And it's built entirely by men with no access to power tools or therapy. You and your team spend 2 days assembling it. First, timber is sawn to shape using huge frame saws and hand axes. It's heavy. It's clumsy. It splinters constantly. Each rib of the centering is spaced apart and tied with planks. The whole thing is lashed, wedged, and sometimes prayed over. Because if it shifts even an inch during construction, everyone on top goes for an unscheduled swim. You wedge the centering between the 2 stone piers. Carefully, slowly. It groans under its own weight. And then you climb it, of course you do, to start placing stones. This is where the real magic begins. Each stone in an arch is called a voussoir. That's a fancy French word for yet another rock that must be shaped by hand with no modern tools and an unhealthy relationship with geometry. You begin laying the first few voussoirs on either side of the centering. These are cut with a slight wedge shape, wider at the top than the bottom, and they must be precise. If the angle is wrong by even a fraction, the stone won't sit properly and the entire arch could buckle. The work is slow. Each stone is lifted into place by hand or with a crude pulley, guided into position by masons yelling contradictory instructions. Left. No, my left. Lower. Not that much. The apprentice at the winch is sweating like a pig in confession. Your arms are shaking. Someone drops a plumb line. Giaffro is muttering Latin curses under his breath. Everything smells like sweat, timber, and fear. And still, one by one, the stones go in. Each new stone presses against the last. The weight transfers downward and sideways. You can almost feel the structure forming, like the bridge is beginning to believe in itself. Still, the arch is not self-supporting. Not yet. The centering bears all the weight. Then comes the moment. The final stone. The keystone. It is, fittingly, shaped like a metaphor. Wider at the top, tapering to a point. This is the stone that makes everything else work. Once it's in place, the forces shift. The arch begins to support itself. Every stone is pushing against its neighbors in perfect balance. Remove one, and the whole thing fails. Keep them all, and you've created a miracle of physics disguised as a bridge. You place the keystone, slowly, reverently. Everyone holds their breath. It slides into place with a thunk. Just a sound. A little one. But it feels holy. The centering stays, for now. You'll remove it in a few days, once the mortars had time to set and everyone's insurance paperwork has been forged. But in this moment, for the first time, the arch is complete. It's oddly beautiful. Not in a flashy way. Not like a stained glass window or a gold chalice, but in the quiet, mathematical certainty of its shape. The clean sweep of the curve. The impossible strength of fragile things working together. You sit for a moment on the pier's edge, legs dangling, sweat cooling on your skin. Below, the river flows. Relentless. Unbothered. And now, conquered. You help bend stone to defy gravity. Using nothing but hand tools, sore muscles, and the endless optimism of people who think bridges are worth suffering for. Then Geoffrey sneezes, startles the donkey, and the donkey kicks over a bucket of mortar into the water. Balance restored. Evening comes. You eat in silence. Bread, again. Turnips, again. You've grown used to the taste of monotony. You wash your hands in the river and marvel that they still work. You smell like lime and sawdust and something vaguely iron-rich. Maybe blood. Maybe soup. Back at your bunk, someone is snoring. Someone else is singing a song about a miller's wife and a large goose. You roll into your bedding. It's damp, of course. But the roof doesn't leak, not tonight. The stars peek through a gap in the thatch. You exhale. Your bones ache. But inside that pain, there is something else. Progress. The arch is done. Tomorrow, you'll build the next. And the next after that. Because once you learn how to make gravity your friend, there's no limit to what you can stack. Just don't drop the keystone. Ever. You wake up to the sound of screaming. Not human screaming, though that wouldn't be out of place, but the high-pitched, demonic shriek of wood under strain. Followed by splashing. Loud splashing. Violent, panic splashing. You roll off your straw mattress, which now smells faintly of goat cheese and permanent disappointment, and stumble outside to investigate. The river has risen, and it's not gently lapping at the stonework like a peaceful painting. No, it's thrashing, roaring, full of branches, debris, and the occasional barrel someone upstream apparently gave up on. The kind of river that looks at your bridge and says, "Oh, cute. Let's destroy that." You blink at the water, which is now touching the bottom of your precious new arch. That was supposed to be at least 5 feet above the surface. So either the river's grown or the world has sunk. Neither option bodes well. Someone, probably Geoffrey, yells something about flood season. You squint. Nobody mentioned this. All those meticulous stone placements, the centering, the prayers to St. Barbara, all now being judged by nature like it's a reality show for wet disasters. Let's take a break from the panic and go full documentary for a moment, shall we? Because while you're standing there contemplating whether water is a sentient enemy, let's talk about hydraulics, medieval style. To build a bridge, you need water. Obviously. That's the whole point. But building in water? That's a special kind of logistical nightmare. In the modern world, engineers have cofferdams, water pumps, concrete, and heavy machinery. In medieval Europe, you've got logs, prayers, and a tragic misunderstanding of how waterproof your shoes are. And if you think that's bad, try this. Rivers move. They meander, swell, flood, and occasionally decide they'd rather not be here anymore and cut a new path. Which means medieval bridge builders weren't just fighting gravity. They were negotiating with angry, unpredictable forces of nature using ropes, wood, and raw stubbornness. Oh, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you're still awake. I know this sounds like a horror story wrapped in a TED Talk, but if you're here for sleepy knowledge wrapped in sarcasm and suffering, you're in the right place. Comment below what time it is, and whether your river's behaving better than ours. Probably yes. So, how do medieval people handle building foundations in water? Well, first, they build cofferdams. Picture a wooden box, square or circular, sunk into the riverbed. It's made by driving huge piles of timber deep into the mud, side by side, to create a temporary enclosure. Then they line it with clay or moss, or literally just jam it full of more mud and hope that's watertight enough. Then, using buckets, bailing bowls, and the infinite patience of men with nothing better to do, they scoop the water out of the enclosure. Now you've got a muddy pit in the middle of a river. Congratulations! Time to build your foundation. You shovel gravel, lay down wooden planks, maybe even drop huge flat stones into the base, anything to stabilize the earth. Remember, rivers are not known for their firm, supportive floors. It's all silt and secrets down there. Once the base is set, you begin raising the pier, that central support column that holds up the arch. Every stone must be shaped underwater or just above it and placed with terrifying precision. Because if this part goes wrong, the whole bridge tips into the drink like a very expensive game of Jenga. And the water fights you every step of the way. It rises when you least expect it. It erodes your carefully packed gravel. It freezes in winter, swells in spring, and fills with mud, silt, algae, and occasionally livestock. One time, a pig floated through the construction zone. Nobody was surprised. Then there's scouring, when fast-moving water undercuts your piers and literally digs them out from below. Like some passive-aggressive natural sabotage. You think you build a solid base? Nope. Surprise hole. The solution? Build cutwaters, pointed or rounded stone extensions on the upstream side of your piers. These help split the current, redirect debris, and make it just slightly less likely your bridge will be carried away like an inconvenient picnic table. You did all this already. You thought you'd accounted for flood season. But flood season didn't account for you. Now the river is here, knocking politely and violently at your beautifully arched stonework. You run to check the centering. The wooden scaffolding and arch frames are holding, but the ropes are straining. Water laps over the lowest planks. One of the apprentices is trying to bail it out with his shoe. You decide not to yell at him. He's doing his best. So, what do? Simple, you panic. Quietly. Then you and the team start piling up stones and timber along the bank to redirect the flow, a crude weir or diversion. You hammer in stakes, shove sacks of gravel where you think they might matter, and tie down everything that looks like it could float. Hours pass. It rains. Of course it does. You work into the night. Lanterns flicker. The water rises a little more. And then, it stops. Not dramatically. Not with a trumpet sound or a celestial beam of light. It just stops rising. Levels out. You watch it for an hour to be sure. Maybe two. And finally, the water recedes a few inches. The bridge has survived. For now. Giofra lets out a long breath and promptly falls into the mud, asleep. You sit next to him. You're soaked to the bone. Your hands are cracked and freezing. There's a cut on your shin from a plank that tried to take you down. You smell like wet rope, mildew, and river panic. But you're alive. And so is the bridge. Barely. Let's talk about what happens when things don't go this well. Because, historically, medieval bridges failed. A lot. Sometimes it took decades. Sometimes it took weeks. Some collapsed mid-construction, others were washed away in storms. And yet people kept building them, because the alternative was not having a bridge. And as previously discussed, ferries were unreliable, fords were deadly, and swimming was not a skill. It was a punishment. Bridge collapses weren't just engineering failures. They were social disasters. Whole towns relied on those crossings for trade, taxes, even pilgrimage routes. A collapsed bridge could mean economic ruin. Or, worse, increased walking. You feel the weight of that history now, not metaphorically, but literally. Your shirt is soaked. Your shoulders are sore. Your boots are squishing. But your bridge is still there. You head back to camp. Supper is a watery stew, and the bread's gone moldy again. You eat it anyway. Inside your damp blanket, under the rattling roof, you wonder if tomorrow will be dry. Probably not. But you'll be back on the scaffolding either way. Because rivers may hate you. But you've got stone. And gravity. and extremely poor boundaries when it comes to danger. Sleep, finally, wraps around your bones. Tomorrow, you build again. You wake up with a spider in your mouth. It's a small one. Probably. Hard to say, really, because by the time you sit bolt upright, gagging and swatting at your own face, it's long gone. Possibly into your beard. Possibly into legend. Either way, it's not the worst thing that's happened this week. You rinse your mouth with stale ale. It's the closest thing you have to mouthwash, and if you squint, it tastes like disappointment in barley. Then you roll up your blanket, tie your boots, one lace is just a piece of twine now, and stumble out into the dawn mist. Today, you're building scaffolding. Again. Not the fancy, OSHA-proof kind, with safety rails and evenly spaced planks. No, this is the medieval version, a terrifying, swaying skeleton of timber held together by rope, wooden pegs, and the collective denial of everyone climbing it. Let's take a moment to appreciate just how little sense this all makes. Because if you're thinking, wait, how did medieval people build a giant stone bridge with no cement, no cranes, and no reinforced steel? The answer is simple. Sheer audacity. And some of the most unhinged yet effective engineering hacks ever invented. Let's break it down, one splintery disaster at a time. But first, if you've made it this far without succumbing to sleep or existential dread, thank you. Seriously, hit that like button. Subscribe if you enjoy sarcastic history rants, and let me know in the comments what city or obscure rural field you're listening from. Extra points if you're horizontal and covered in cats. Now, let's talk about scaffolding. Scaffolding in the Middle Ages was ambitious. They used wooden poles, sometimes whole tree trunks, lashed together with rope made from hemp, flax, or animal hair. No metal bolts. No steel joints. Just a web of timber and hope. Each level of scaffolding was supported by diagonal braces and lashed horizontal beams, forming a crude platform that was almost level. Usually, the workers, like you, climbed using ladders that were also made of wood. No safety harness. No helmet. Just your ability to not fall and a prayer to Saint Joseph, patron saint of carpenters and people with terrible insurance plans. And because medieval bridges often spanned rivers or deep valleys, sometimes the only way to build scaffolding was to hang it from the partially built bridge itself. Yes, they would wedge beams out from the side of the structure and build downward, essentially constructing a wooden hammock of death, suspended over open water. How did this not kill everyone? It did. But not everyone. Just enough to make you seriously consider taking up sheep herding instead. Now, let's talk lifting. You've got a 300-pound block of carved limestone, and you need to hoist it 20 feet into the air. Do you? A. Use a forklift? B. Use a crane? C. Use a spinning hamster wheel powered by a guy named Gene who hasn't had breakfast? Correct. C. Welcome to the treadwheel crane. Imagine a giant wooden wheel, like the one a hamster runs in, only human-sized and terrifying. A worker stands inside and walks forward, causing the wheel to rotate. The axle is connected to a drum, which winds a rope around it and pulls a load upward. It is elegant. It is horrifying. It is somehow effective. Treadwheel cranes were used all over Europe to build cathedrals, castles, and bridges. They could lift massive weights with surprising efficiency, assuming your wheel walker didn't faint, slip, or start running in the wrong direction because he saw a bee. Did people fall? Yes. Did ropes snap? Absolutely. Was it regulated? No, of course not. Regulation hadn't been invented yet. Regulation, at this point in history, consisted of someone yelling, "Watch your foot 5 seconds too late." Let's move on to pulleys. Medieval builders didn't just rely on brute force. They were obsessed with mechanical advantage. Compound pulley systems, multiple wheels with ropes running through them, allowed small teams to lift incredible weights. The more pulleys you added, the easier the lift. But also, the more ropes you needed, the more friction you introduced, and the more likely it was that Geoffrey would trip over one of them and catapult a perfectly good column into the river. Still, the ingenuity is stunning. You'd think a civilization without calculators or graph paper would be limited to stacking things. But no, they had cranes, hoists, pulleys, derricks, and even floating pontoons that could transport stones across water. Yes, floating pontoons. They'd lash barrels, logs, or even whole boats together, pile stones on top, and float them downriver like the most ill-advised game of river Tetris you've ever seen. Let's not forget levers. The oldest and most glorious of simple machines. Levering a stone block into place is all about balance and pivot points. You stick a wooden pole under the rock, wedge a smaller stone under it as the fulcrum, and apply pressure. Do it right, and you move a 1,000-pound boulder with a stick. Do it wrong, and you get a boulder to the shin. Guess which one happens more often? You want another absurd hack? Try this one. When medieval engineers needed a straight line across a long distance, say, to make sure their bridge wasn't drifting off course, they used a taut string and a bucket of water. They'd stretch a string tight between two stakes, then use a plumb line, that's a weight on a string, to make sure their verticals were actually vertical. To check for level, they might float a board in a shallow pan of water. Because water always finds level. You know, hydraulics. Like a boss. Your entire bridge alignment? Check with tools made of rope, wood, and witchcraft. But maybe the most underrated tool of all? Math. Not modern math. No algebraic expressions or trig functions. Just basic geometry and ratios. Passed down from the Romans, preserved by monks, and scribbled into dusty notebooks now worth more than your village. You might not be able to read. But someone, the master mason, usually, had enough education to understand angles, measurements, and proportions. He knew how to divide a circle into degrees using nothing but a compass and his eyeballs. And from those simple numbers came arches, piers, and the graceful lines of a bridge that might just outlive everyone who built it. Back in the present, which is to say, the 13th century, you are currently inside one of those treadwheel cranes because you lost a bet. It's dark. It's loud. The wheel creaks like it's made of haunted cheese. You walk forward, slowly, the beam above you groaning with every rotation. Outside, a stone block rises into the sky, swinging gently. You are now both engine and ballast. It is oddly peaceful, meditative, even, until someone yells faster, and you remember that your ankle is still healing from the last time you did this. Eventually, the block is set into place. You climb out of the wheel, wobbly, soaked in sweat, and probably 3 inches shorter than when you started. You eat lunch sitting on a scaffolding beam, legs dangling. Bread, cheese, a bit of onion, if you're lucky. You watch as a new set of pulleys is rigged up for the next lift. The ropes creak. The wind shifts. The sun peeks through the clouds and briefly turns the bridge into something almost beautiful. It should not work. None of it should work. But it does. Wood, rope, stone, muscle, madness, geometry, collective delusion, and maybe a bit of divine luck. You lean back against a timber post. A pigeon lands next to you, stares with deep judgment, and flies off again. You are exhausted. But you are also, impossibly, building something that will stand for centuries. Assuming it doesn't fall into the river next week. Sleep well tonight. Tomorrow's lift is even heavier. You wake up to silence, which, if you've been living on a medieval bridge site, is deeply suspicious. The usual morning chorus, hammering, coughing, swearing, and the inexplicable sound of goats, is missing. It's quiet. Too quiet. You sit up, blinking at the dim light leaking through your canvas tent. For the first time in months, your back doesn't hurt immediately. Which is nice, until you realize why. You're done. The bridge is finished. After years of hauling stones, cutting wood, sweating through winters, praying through floods, and developing a deep personal hatred for ropes, the thing is done. Complete. Arch after arch of painstakingly placed stone stretching across the river like some colossal monument to masochism and medieval overachievement. You should feel proud. You should feel emotional. You should feel something. But mostly you feel suspicious. Because you know, deep in your bones, that something is going to go wrong. But before we get to the ceremonial disaster, let's take a moment to appreciate what you've just accomplished. You've built a stone bridge without cement, without steel, without modern anything. You did it with stone blocks shaped by hand, wooden scaffolding designed on the back of a goat ledger, ropes that now haunt your dreams, treadwheel cranes operated by human hamsters, and engineering knowledge that predates the Renaissance by several centuries. And not only is the bridge standing, it's beautiful. Arches curve perfectly. Cutwaters rise like stone shark fins, parting the current. The surface is wide enough for carts, donkeys, and heavily armored knights with a flair for dramatic entrances. It even has low stone parapets so people won't immediately fall off, which, for the Middle Ages, is shockingly considerate. Also, there are chapels. Yes, chapels. Because medieval people didn't just want to cross the river, they wanted to thank the Almighty for not dying halfway across. So on some bridges, they built tiny churches or shrines right in the middle. Nothing says, "Please don't collapse under my ox cart," like a well-placed saint. Now, let's discuss the ceremonial crossing. Because it's not enough to just build the thing. You have to use it, and do so with the kind of pomp and pageantry that only a feudal lord with gout and a velvet cape can summon. The town gathers. Trumpets blare. Children throw herbs. A bishop arrives to bless the structure, which involves flinging holy water at it like it owes him money. There's incense. There's chanting. There's that one guy in the back yelling about taxes again. Everyone ignores him. You and your fellow builders stand in the background, covered in dust and barely awake, while a nobleman cuts a ribbon that someone clearly stole from a monastery banner. Then, the first car crosses. It creaks slowly over the stone. Everyone holds their breath. The oxen blink. A wheel wobbles. But the bridge holds. Cheers erupt. The bishop starts crying. You're hugged by someone you're 90% sure you've never met. Someone offers you beer. You accept. You drink it. You realize it's mostly water. You regret drinking it. The party continues. There's dancing, music, and awkward medieval flirting that mostly involves complimenting someone's ankles. And you? You wander out onto the bridge, in the quiet space between waves of villagers, and look out over the water. You built this. You. A mud-cake human being with a sunburn shaped like a tool belt. You built something permanent in a world where most things, food, health, roofs, are not. But just as you're enjoying this rare moment of reflection, you hear a sound. Not a crack. Not a collapse. Worse. Hooves. You turn around. A group of knights is approaching. Armored. Grinning. One of them, the big one with the shiny helmet and clear lack of subtlety, is galloping. Galloping. Across your new bridge. You raise a hand. You shout. Something between stop and "Are you insane?" and "My mortar is still curing." But it's too late. The horses thunder across the stone. One of them knocks over the ceremonial potted basil. Another one nearly crashes into the bishop, who mutters something unrepeatable in Latin. The bridge holds. Again. Barely. But now you're shaking. Because you remember what happens when bridges aren't used correctly. See? Medieval bridges were tough, but they were also delicate in very specific ways. You couldn't overload them. You couldn't let carts get stuck on them during high tide. You definitely couldn't build extra houses on top of them just because you ran out of land, which, spoiler, they did. Yes, people built houses on bridges, and shops, and mills. Because why not? It's a bridge. It has space. And nothing says urban planning like putting a chimney next to a public crossing. Some bridges became full-on neighborhoods. The old London Bridge, covered in shops, people, fire hazards, and occasionally human heads on spikes, just for flavor. So now, staring down a group of wet, enthusiastic knights, you realize your bridge's future isn't going to be clean, quiet, or well-maintained. It's going to be loud, crowded, and full of people using it wrong. And you feel weirdly okay with that. Because maybe that's what bridges are for. Not just for crossing, but for living. For arguing, kissing, buying shoes, losing wheels, and building things on top of things that probably shouldn't have things on top of them. It's not perfect. It's messy, medieval infrastructure. But it's yours. You sit down against the parapet, ignoring the pigeon that lands next to you and starts pecking your sleeve. You're too tired to care. The sun is warm. The river sparkles. The bridge is still standing. And you? You might finally sleep. Right here. On the bridge you built. Even if someone gallops past and kicks dirt in your face. Which they do. Because of course they do. You wake up face down on stone. Your nose is pressed against the dusty surface of a bridge that you allegedly helped build, though right now it mostly feels like a pillow made of regrets. The air smells like ox droppings, wet wool, and roasted leeks. There's shouting in the distance. You're not sure what day it is, but you are sure that someone just tripped over your leg and swore in 3 different dialects. You sit up slowly, bones popping like poorly tied knots, and take a moment to remember, you built this bridge. You did it. It's done. And now, inevitably, it's going to fall down. No, not today. Probably. But at some point. Because that's what bridges do. They fall. Sometimes after decades. Sometimes after centuries. Sometimes right in the middle of a bishop's funeral procession. It's kind of their thing. So let's take a moment to reflect on all the glorious failures that came before your own triumph. Because if history has taught us anything, and it absolutely has, but only if we pay attention for more than 14 seconds, it's that medieval bridges love to collapse. Spectacularly. And they almost always took people, animals, and public dignity down with them. But before we dive into the disaster fest, quick reminder, if you're still awake and somehow enjoying this slow descent into medieval structural failure, give the video a like, maybe subscribe, and tell me in the comments what the most questionable bridge you've ever crossed was. Extra points if it swayed. Double points if there were goats involved. Now then, let's begin with the grand tradition of undermining, a term that today means to subtly weaken, but back then meant literally digging under something until it collapsed. Usually castles. But bridges? Oh yes. If your medieval town was under siege and the bridge was your only path into the city, congratulations, it just became a very large, very obvious target. Enemy forces would undermine bridge piers, digging tunnels beneath them, propping them up with wood, and then setting the wood on fire. The results? One flaming support column. One very wet, very surprised garrison. And one bridge turning into a historical footnote. But sometimes it wasn't enemies that did the damage. Sometimes it was weather. Or overconfidence. Or an angry river that didn't care about your plans. Take the Pont de Treuse in Tournai, Belgium, a fortified bridge built in the late 13th century. Thick stone towers, gorgeous arches, and a design so overbuilt it laughed in the face of erosion. Until the 20th century, when a war and a few unfortunate German explosives reminded everyone that even the strongest bridges eventually get tired of being impressive. But let's rewind further. Much further. Let's talk about the old London Bridge. Not the cute little one in Arizona. The real one. The original London Bridge is falling down legend. Spoiler, it absolutely was falling down. Constantly. The original medieval London Bridge was built in stone by Peter of Colchurch in 1209. It was massive. Grand. Covered in houses, shops, chapels, and people doing all the things you're absolutely not supposed to do on a bridge. Like lighting fires. And dumping waste. And adding extra weight to the structure until it developed the architectural equivalent of anxiety. The bridge survived centuries. Sort of. In 1212, a fire broke out at one end of the bridge. It spread rapidly. People fled to the other end, which was also on fire. Hundreds died, some trapped between the flames, others jumping into the Thames in panic. It was one of the earliest recorded instances of this is why we can't have nice things. Then there was flooding. Medieval engineers were clever. But rivers? Rivers are petty, vengeful forces of nature with a passion for rearranging things. If you built your piers too close together, the river current would speed up between them, scouring the bed, eroding the foundations, and eventually pulling your bridge down into watery oblivion. Some rivers even developed reputations. The Rhone, the Danube, the Seine. All beautiful, all deadly. Like if swans had teeth. Which brings us to one of the most dramatic failures in bridge history, the Pont Saint-Benazet in Avignon, France. Built in the 12th century by a shepherd boy who allegedly heard voices, because of course he did, this bridge was 900 meters long, with 22 arches. It spanned the Rhone with divine ambition and zero chill. It collapsed. Repeatedly. In fact, it collapsed so often that they just gave up. After the 17th century, they stopped rebuilding it. Now only 4 arches remain, standing like the skeletal remains of someone who tried really hard and eventually took the hint. Tourists love it. Let's not forget ice damage, either. Winter came, rivers froze, and when the ice finally broke up in spring, giant slabs of it would slam into bridge piers like medieval battering rams made by nature. If your piers weren't protected by cutwaters, those wedge-shaped extensions that split the current, then your entire support structure might be gone by sunrise. Along with your toll booth, your sheep cart, and that one guy who always sold suspicious meat pies. Even animals cause collapses. There's at least one recorded case, in Italy, where a flock of panic sheep was herded onto a small footbridge during market day. Too many hooves. Not enough stone. The bridge gave way, and several townsfolk ended up wet, confused, and very upset about the wool situation. Now, sometimes bridges fell not because of sabotage, weather, or livestock, but simply because they were too ambitious. Builders would get inspired. They'd design wider arches, taller spans, thinner supports. And then they'd realize, too late, that pointed arches still obey gravity, and so does poorly cut stone. This is why master masons were paranoid. Why they triple-checked alignments. Why they argued over buttressing like it was a matter of life or death, because it was. One poorly placed keystone, and you'd have hundreds of tons of rock deciding they'd rather live in the river now. And when medieval bridges fell, it wasn't a quiet affair. It was loud. It was violent. It sent carts flying, animals scattering, and prayers echoing. Rebuilding took months or years. Towns were cut off. Trade stopped. Toll collectors wept into their ledgers. And everyone blamed the guy who signed off on the scaffolding. Of course, sometimes failure led to innovation. After a collapse, builders would analyze the damage to the extent possible without scientific tools and try new designs. Bigger foundations, wider piers, better stone, more conservative spans. In that sense, every failed bridge was a brutal, expensive teacher. And every surviving bridge owes its life to the crushed timbers and broken arches of its predecessors. So, sitting on your bridge now, legs swinging off the edge, biting into a crust of bread that's at least 40% rock, you think about all of this. How close you came. How many things could have gone wrong. You remember the flood, the windstorm, that one worker who couldn't measure in a straight line to save his life, the day the pulley snapped and turned a stone block into a very expensive pancake. But you made it. Your bridge is standing. For now. And when, not if, it eventually falls, it won't be a failure. It'll be part of the story. Just like the rest of them. Because in the medieval world, nothing lasted forever. Not roads. Not kings. Not questionable soup recipes. But a bridge? A bridge was a promise. That even in a world of collapse, someone could build something that held up, long enough for someone else to try again. You brush the crumbs off your tunic, stretch your arms, watch the river roll by, and wonder not if your bridge will fall, but when, and who will be around to rebuild it. Hopefully not you. You're taking up cheesemaking.